I started out as a communist. I used to be a communist. I used to think I used to be a communist because for me, just like, what drags people into communism, I thought it was the best chance that the poor have, but the capitalists are the exploitative class and all of that. I used to believe all of that. But through my lived experience, I literally tell people I had an intellectual journey. When people ask me what's your story, I don't tell them the story of how I went from doing this to doing that. I most often talk to them about my intellectual journey because to me that was the most defining journey of my life.
Welcome to another episode of Voices of Liberty, powered by Young Americans for Liberty. I'm your host, Sean Themea, and today we're talking to someone who truly understands the power of entrepreneurship on a global scale, not just in the United States, but how capitalism and development unleashes human potential around the world. She knows this better than anybody. We are pleased to have in studio today, Magatte Wade. Magatte, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Very happy to be here.
Absolutely. Now, you've done a lot of incredible things for entrepreneurship and the message of liberty, which we'll get into talking about today. But I want to start from the very beginning. Everyone has their liberty origin story. So I want to hear from you, when was your torch of liberty first lit on fire? What got you interested in unleashing human potential?
I think in my case, it started when I was 7. I didn't know that's what happened, but in retrospect now I know. So what happened is when I turned 7 is when my family, my parents, who had emigrated to Europe some 5 years ago, basically after their immigration journey having worked, they decided to have me go and be reunited with them. They were in Germany back then. And so, yeah, because as soon as I was born in Senegal, raised there. As soon as I turned age 2, done breastfeeding, this is when my mother and father decided to migrate away to provide for me for a better life back home. And so, so they left me when I was 2. And then by the time I was 7, that's when they called back for me to be reunited with them in Europe. And when I arrived in Germany, I looked around and I figured to myself, how come these people have all of this and we don't? And literally back then, what I was talking about was back home in Senegal, when my grandma said, Magatte, it's time for your shower. I knew that I would then have a good 45 minutes to an hour to go play some more because I knew that my grandma would have to get a stove of coal going, put a pot of water on it, wait for it to boil. Then we put that water into a bigger bucket, mix it with cold water, and then somebody would have to drag it to a shower area. And there, some 45 minutes to an hour later, I can finally proceed to take my shower with a small plastic pot, taking from the small plastic pot, taking the water from a bucket, using a small plastic pot back and forth to my body. That's what taking a shower meant. And then here in Germany, my mom says, Magatte, time for your shower. I'm like, where is a bucket of cold water? I'm just not getting naked in this cold weather because I arrived in the middle of a winter. And she's like, oh, come on, you silly, just jump in. And I jump into the shower stall and I turn the knobs around. The water's coming down. Turns out you can control the temperature, even the pressure. And I was just like, I really thought that somebody was playing a really bad case of juju on me. I'm thinking, who is behind the wall making all of this happen? I mean, put yourself in my shoes, right? And then it was not just about the shower. It was about the grocery stores where I could see so more types of apples and breads than my little brain could count. And then the paved roads and all of that. And the question really became, how come they have this and we don't? It became this obsessive question that so many kids can have sometimes. And my whole life was devoted to finding out why that was the case. And eventually the question became, why are some countries poor while others are rich? And it's in finding, and so for me, that's when I think the spark was ignited in me. That moment led me to discover the power of freedom and what freedom had to do between the fact that in one country, I have to go through all of those steps to take a shower, and in another one, all I have to do is jump in a shower stall, and within a few seconds, I could take my shower. Where there, it's up to an hour before I could take my shower. That's when this idea of freedom, I think that's when it was, that's finding out the truth again is what showed me the difference between how freedom, I guess, is the reason why some countries are poor and some countries are rich. And all the lack of human dignity that poverty breeds in humanity, that also I found out. So for me, if I had to ask myself, because people asked me this question before, that if I go back and I'm honest with myself, that was the defining moment of my life that eventually set me up on this journey to discover how freedom can truly be the difference between life and death, literally, and I'm sure we'll go into it, between war and peace, literally, and between having human dignity and flourishing or not. And so, yeah.
Yeah, so this wasn't a theory, an economic textbook, a YouTube video. This was your lived experience that made you realize, the impact freedom can have on people's lives, for better and lack thereof, of worse. It reminds me of the visual of North and South Korea, right? Where you zoom out, South Korea, from space, from the sky, it's full of light, it's full of activity, full of prosperity, and North Korea is just dark, no light, right? So that visual, I think people can relate to, but you were living it. You saw, what it was like to have prosperity and abundance and what it felt like to not have prosperity and abundance. So tons of questions I feel like I could ask you about this. You mentioned, how poverty leads to I'm paraphrasing, but poverty contributing to a lack of human dignity. And I want to dive in more on that because we talked about what abundance can bring, hot showers and of course more. But let's go down that rabbit hole for a minute. How do you mean poverty, the relationship between poverty and human dignity? Can you elaborate on what you saw, what you mean by that?
Right. Well, when you look around you, at this point, Africa is the poorest region in the world. You could take two cases recently, and they happen to be very high-profile cases. Nigeria. Let's take the case of Nigeria. Just in the past 2 weeks, we had two major disasters happen, but it's because they happen to high-profile people that the rest of the world is noticing. But this is happening, I would argue, to African people every single day, sadly, to many people. One of them was this boxer. He's Nigerian, of Nigerian origin, but based in the UK. He traveled to Nigeria for the holidays and, just hanging out. And then this one day, I think it was 2 weeks ago, a week ago, they have a terrible car accident. His two friends died on the spot. And then no ambulance, nowhere to be coming. And literally you had people trying to help him and sit him up. No, we all know, don't try to sit up. And somebody who just had an accident, got to keep them, stabilize them. But it was all of these people around them, and somebody even stole his phone in the process. Then also, just a few days ago, we had somebody like Chimamanda Adichie. She's a very well-known writer. And what happened is one of her twin boys, they were in Nigeria for, the holidays as well. And then one of her twin boys, I think he's 20 months old, fell ill. They took him to the hospital. And then there, basically, turns out that they gave him too much anesthesia. I don't know how you call that.
Anesthesia.
Anesthesia. And then the guy was just, the person who did that just kind of held him on his shoulder to take him from one room to another, one bed to another. Poor kid died, of course. And we all know his mom saying to everybody, this would never have happened if he was in the US. Actually, he was supposed to be flown to the US the next day to get proper care. These are the things that I argue are happening because of poverty. And at the same time, when you have Africa being the poorest region in the world, it causes other things. So when people are saying, my country is so poor, if I stay here, I can't make it, then they decide to migrate away. That migration journey is oftentimes the most horrible journeys for most people. And let's give my example for Senegal. As a Senegalese, I grew up with these stories of people packing themselves into little fishermen's boats, trying to cross over to Europe in search of making a better life. And oftentimes the boat capsizes. So right now at the bottom of the ocean, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of young Senegalese people serving as fish food at the bottom of the ocean. And when that's not the case, when they don't take that sea route, they take air route. Air route means somewhere above England, a body is going to drop because somebody thought it would be a good idea to hide in the landing gear of a plane on their way to immigrate to Europe to find a job so they can feed their family back home. Sometimes they open the cargo section of the plane in Paris Charles de Gaulle, and they see a frozen dead body in there because somebody thought it was a good idea to hide there. They don't know that when the plane goes so high up, it gets so cold, you die. And then when people try to avoid sea route, air route, they go land route. And land route, what happens to them? Most of the time they get stuck in Libya. And in Libya, they get sold as slaves. It took for the CNN to talk about it, for people to believe what we were saying. And so right now, in 2026, you have slave markets where people like me are sold between $300 and $500. That's my price. Sean, where is human dignity on that in all of these stories? Where is it? Where is the human dignity in all of this? Where is it? And then you have all of this is going on, and our countries are so poor that the rest of the world decides that the best way to support us is through aid for the most part. And the aid oftentimes relies on the biggest sub-stories about us. They will talk about these things. They will show you the child with flies in their eyes and the big protuberant bellies that shows you that they're truly malnourished, even though they have big bellies. It's because it's full of parasites and other stuff like that, right? So you see that, the NGOs, the whole aid industry, they use our miserable lives in order to raise money to supposedly come and help us no longer be miserable. But in the meantime, what does it do? In the meantime, what it does is, I give you an example. One of my young employees in Senegal, her name is Yahara, and when this story happened, she was 26 years old, never had a job before. We created a job that she could have. And her only waiting in life was to wait for her husband to provide for her. And that's another thing too. Many women, the way they escape their poverty, or because, when you're a woman and you're like one more feeding mouth in the family, the way the family pushes you out is go get married and you become somebody else's problem. Well, you become somebody else's problem. Also, that's when they start to beat you up, do all types of crazy things to you because you know what? They know that you have no economic independence. You can't go anywhere. Where's the dignity in that? But anyway, this employee of mine, Yahara, she said to one day I was explaining why Africa is where it's at, how do we get out of it, and all of that. And I explained the relationship between poverty is solved by prosperity. Prosperity is built by entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs need freedom. Most basic. Of course, I went into it in much more detail, which I'm sure we'll go into it as we could talk here. But that pretty much is the premise. And she got it all. And then she started to cry. And I said, why are you crying? And she said, I'm crying because up till now, because every time I open a magazine, it's someone like me with a black face, a black girl, my braids, all of that I see that's looking pathetic. But the world has to give us shoes, give us food, help us with school, all of this stuff. And they're always showing me in my most pathetic state. And she said, and because of that, I have grown to believe that we Africans are inferior. Where is the dignity in that, Sean? To walk around feeling inferior. Many Africans feel this way and they will tell her. And that is happening because we are the poorest region in the world, and the world supposedly tries to support us with aid, and the process is showing us in our most pathetic state, and then that goes to reinforce in our own minds a lack of sense of dignity. And then she said, but that's not why I'm crying. And I said, then why are you crying? She said, it's because now I know that it is not true. It is not true. Us Africans are not inferior. And you see, when she said that, I saw a physical transformation literally on this woman. The whole time I've known her, she always looks down, always hunchback kind of. She's this beautiful girl, but she just has this weight. But when she said that, when she said, now I know it's not true, I saw her literally, she gained, I think, an inch before me. She just lifted up her head, shoulders back and down, rolled back, super straight back. I was witnessing somebody going from a state of feeling like a nobody, of feeling less than human, to somebody reclaiming their human dignity. And that was, and the prosperity had not even happened to her. What happened to her in that moment is that she understood that freedom was the way and that she can have it. And it is not magical. It makes sense and it is within reach. Just the simple idea of freedom, even before she could just get it. She could just literally have this economic freedom in this case. Even before that, just to learn, already a sense of dignity was restored in her. I mean, yeah.
These are incredible insights and incredible stories. Horrible things we've discussed, but also, breakthroughs, people realizing that they can reclaim their dignity through freedom.
Yes.
Right, and through pursuing prosperity.
Yes.
And so I want to, circle back to you, right? You had this breakthrough in your youth. You saw how some nations were prosperous that could, create the conditions where people could achieve their dignity, and other situations where that was not the case. What was the first big step you took in making this your life's mission, your career? What was, the first big step in your journey to becoming, a lighthouse for prosperity?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question. And it was not a specific moment. It was something just in the building. So when I went to Germany and I saw that around me and I had this big question, and then eventually it became this question, the defining question of my life. How come some countries like mine and so many others in Africa are poor? Meanwhile, US, New Zealand, Australia, you name it, are all of these wealthy nations. What's going on? So then, I was in Germany living my life. A couple of years later, the family moved to France because they decided if we're going to stay in Europe, it's better to be in France because of, the historical ties with, France and Senegal. We used to be the colony of France. In any case, life is happening. I'm going to business school in France. And after business school, I decided to move to the US because I just looked around and I felt like this country is too small for my ambitions. I need to, Hollywood had sold me the American dream to the point that everything in France felt too small for me, honestly. I just felt that this country, if I go there, I have to say, even there, the movies were, in the end, what it was selling me was not just the prosperity, but it just felt so free. The big open spaces. Everything in America feels big, right? Everything, the roads, everything feels big. And, as I remember as a teenager watching these shows, Beverly Hills 90210, 90210, whatever it was.
90210, yeah.
210, yeah, whatever it was, right? And we're thinking to ourselves, like, dude, kids can have this type of freedom. They have their car at 16. They can do pretty much they have their whole lives on their side. And just that, again, freedom, there's something very attractive about freedom. In any case, so as soon as I could make my own decision as to where I want to go, I came to the US, of course. And then in the United States, I landed in Columbus, Indiana at first, working for a small family company. For the Wences, Carol and Eldon Wentz. I always like to say their name because they really got me started in the US, this very wonderful family in the Midwest, in Columbus, Indiana. And I was just there too, living my life, learning that in fact, I needed to learn to speak American, and it was very different from the British that I was speaking, accent and words.
We don't call French fries chips over here. No way.
Yeah, no. And so, all of these things, and just, learning about what I call today the deep American values that you are still quite intact in the Midwest. right? This approach and devotion to the concept of family, to the concept of faith, to, all of it was just amazing. And so that's what I was experiencing all. And eventually, after 9 months of working there, it became clear that I had outgrown my responsibilities. I was almost 2 or 3 years in advance, ahead of how long they thought it would take me to finish all the things that they wanted me to do. And it became clear, Carol said, you've got such a bright future, and I just don't think it's here for you at this point. We could be selfish and keep you here because we love you so much. And of course, you decide what you want to do, you can stay here, but we really believe there is some, you're destined to a big future. And fate made it that at that point, I was also, there's this guy in California whom I had known in business school in France who had moved to US, same reasons as me. And eventually it became clear that there was more than just, friendship. And went to visit him in San Francisco for a weekend, came back, and I knew that, I got to go back. I left my heart in San Francisco, went back. So when I arrived, I was on H-1B visa, which means that basically now I have to start all over. And if I don't find a sponsorship very quickly, I might have to get out of the US. But it all worked out. Within a couple of weeks, I found multiple job offers with an H-1B attached to it. So eventually it worked out. The man that I went to California to be with obviously became my husband, and he was an entrepreneur, French entrepreneur. We're living in Silicon Valley. And I was living in Silicon Valley in the heydays of the dot-com boom and all of that. And working and supporting companies like Google and Netflix before they even became name brands, household name brands. It was amazing. I mean, Netflix was I used to get lost going to Netflix because it was in the middle of nowhere, South San Jose, one of the worst parts of town. They were just getting started, startup. They raise money, but, they can't be spending it in fancy offices. So in any case, I'm looking around and I'm seeing this amazing vibe and starting to learn this whole thing about entrepreneurship and it's just magic, and that entrepreneurship, this magic of creating something out of nothing. And so I'm starting to have this bug, right? And feeling this freedom all around, because how else do you explain two people going to lunch, having an idea on the back of a napkin, literally, this is not cliche, I've seen it, have an idea, and then from there, roll over to a venture capitalist who's going to give them some money, then to the lawyers who help them set up everything. And then this whole ecosystem that was supporting this. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. And I literally watched people create products, services, all of it new, but it didn't exist the minute I looked at it before. And I was just getting this bug and I didn't know it. And eventually, in the midst of, and I was very successful as a headhunter back in those days. I was a headhunter in finance and accounting. That's how I knew these other companies. In any case, I was doing extremely well for myself. But one day, I got an emotional breakdown. And because today I don't want to be crying today. I'm not going to go into too much of the details. But what happens is, every time I had to consider the life of abundance that I've been afforded in America, I could not help but the very next second be overwhelmed by the knowledge of the life of scarcity that I had left back home. I could not help then than just to be reminded of the people drowning at sea, the people falling from airplanes, and the people literally being sold as slaves. And it would just ruin everything for me. It just would consume me with pain. It would consume me with anger. It's just bad stuff. My whole life, when that happens, which is often, I would always, prior to that incident, I would always hide it. I would cope by hiding it under the rug. I would tell myself, listen, this issue of Africa being so poor has been here way before your birth, and it probably will be here long after you're gone. So try to see if perhaps you can manage to live a good life for yourself, and let everybody else do the same as much as they can, and let's call that a win. But that day was not happening. That coping mechanism completely failed. I literally my body was jerking around. I almost had an accident. I almost died. And I stopped the car, got out of that car, fell to my knees, and right at that moment, my intuition was surrender to God and surrender right now. And I just surrendered, and I said, God, from here on, every breath that you allow me to take, I want to put it towards the betterment of my continent and of Africa and making sure it takes a decisive shift towards prosperity. Now I banged a car, drove away, and I knew everything would be different from this moment on. And different my life very much turned out to be. A few months later, I went to Senegal when I haven't been there for 4 years because of the visa process I was going through in the US. You cannot leave because, otherwise you can't get back in until it's done. So went back and discovered that my juice that I loved so much, the hibiscus drink, was disappearing, and the women who used to grow it were losing their livelihoods and leaving the countryside to go to the city to get jobs, especially as maids, and being treated like slaves. Oftentimes, the way these women are treated is just terrible, even by our own people, oftentimes, sadly. And so it made me very mad. And I said, but eventually, my whole mantra in life is criticize by creating. My father would always say, don't come to me with your problems. I want to know that you have thought of alternatives. They don't have to be the right ones, but that's the mode in which real solutions come out. We don't want you in a victimhood spot. We have agency and we fight no matter what. And so, yeah, my fighting back was start a brand. The product is going to be these juices that you want to bring back to the world. In doing so, put these women back to work. And you also bring so you're bringing back your juice and you're putting women back to work. And that's what we did. So that was my first foray into entrepreneurship. And you see, I went into it. I didn't wake up one day, Sean, and be like, oh, gee, I want to be rich. Let me see what I can do to make money and to be rich. No. It was simply there is a problem that I detected. What is my solution? Entrepreneurs are those of us who criticize by creating. But it mattered in this case that when I saw this problem and I decided to do something about it, I was a nobody. I knew nothing about beverages except my grandma's recipes. But hey, I was in my kitchen using her recipes and trying to make stuff up. And I set up a little company, and I found a food chemist to help me with the formulation so it stabilizes, at scale. All of these things. But you see how I had this idea and I could proceed with it. Well, now think about it, Bert. When I created that company, we had a sister company in the US and a sister company in Africa, Senegal. So the Senegalese one was mostly about the supply chain for the raw ingredient that came from there. And then the US did everything else, R&D, packaging, all of that stuff. Well, when I set up the company in Senegal and I set up the sister company in America, I noticed something crazy. In America, back then, it took me less than half a day to legally register the company. And I think back then it was costing $275, maybe something like that, to register the company. The sister company in Senegal, by the time I finished, it took 2 years. It had taken 2 years, thousands of dollars. And then I look in the US, I can pretty much contract with anybody the way I want. So you have this flexibility of employment at will. Back home, turns out you're married to your employees for good or for bad. And a state employee gets to decide if Sean and Magatte get to work together, and the state get in a way to decide what type of salary range I need to pay Sean. Not the market. The state. And it's like that about licenses. How many licenses you need to get? All of that stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, trying to do something here, to start and run a business here feels like swimming through molasses. I feel like I'm chained all over the place and I'm trying to run away from the chains, but they're like, they're pulling you back. And it felt so different than my America, experience where I was free. I felt free to do all of these things. And the freedom came from the fact that, A, it didn't cost too much to do it. You didn't have to talk to 20 million people. The regulations were not that crazy. All of that stuff. So it feels free. I have a freedom to enterprise. So here we're back to freedom. And when I saw that, I thought to myself, oh, well, I guess it's because we're poor that everything is so cumbersome. And conversely, them is because they're rich that everything is so easy. But the minute you say that, Sean, you think to yourself, wait, you're poor because you don't have enough money. You don't have enough money because you don't have money because you don't have a source of income. What is a source of income for most of us? A job. Where do jobs come from? Businesses or private sector. Do we believe that businesses exist in a vacuum? Do we believe that if you make it hard for businesses to be born and to grow, do we believe we're going to have as many businesses as if we make it easy for businesses to be born and to grow? Do we? I think no one is going to say you're going to have the same result. Well, there you had it. Because you just told me that African nations are the ones with the suckiest business environments in the world. The ones where it's the hardest for any entrepreneur to start and run a business. And wealthy nations, it happens to be the opposite. Here, entrepreneurs have freedom, way more freedom than those in our countries. And I learned that actually, most of all of Africa, except for 5 nations, when I was looking at all of this, is basically less capitalist. I mean, Scandinavia, all of Scandinavia is more capitalist than almost all of Africa. And then you take a seat back and you're like, what? And so all of these things that I explained, how long it takes to get a permit, how much money it takes to get your business legally registered, how much freedom do you have with employment contract and the labor laws? How complicated are they? How complicated is the tax code? All of these things goes into something that economists call economic freedom. And the best way for people to understand this is how free are folks to engage in the economy, in this case, to be to enterprise. And finally, I had the answer to my question. The little girl's question, why are some countries poor and others rich? Africa is the poorest country in the world, not because of colonialism, not because of slavery, not because of racism, not because of low IQ of Africans. Many people say that. Not because we're lazy, not because. Africa is the poorest region in the world because it happens to be the most overregulated region in the world. That is a region in the world where its entrepreneurs have the least freedom to enterprise. There you had it. And that made sense. And so when I learned that, that's actually when I became obsessed with economics. Obsessed. So I came at this through a lived experience. And then I thought my lived experience was just an anecdote. And so I tried to know if it was just an anecdote. And that's when I started to look at all of these indexes. That's when I learned you even had economic indexes that measured, how easy or hard is it to run a business anywhere in the world. You have the Doing Business Index ranking the World Bank back then. You also have a Fraser Economic Freedom Index, and you have many other indexes that measure these things. And systematically what they show is African nations are the worst. And then I started to think, why is this the case? Have we always been this way? What took place? What's going on? And then I realized that, oh, wow, it's back in the 60s when most African nations were getting their independences, late 50s, early 60s, that also when you had this great ideological battle between, on one end, the Western nations using capitalism as their economic system, facing off with the Eastern Bloc, using various forms of statism as their systems. And then it is during those times that African nations and the African liberators, so people fighting for African, for the liberation of African nations, that's when they were coming up. All of these guys were coming up. And they're coming at a time where these two blocs fighting for influence are looking down south to them to grab, more influence and say, hey, we're right, they're wrong. And us, we're looking at this. We just came out of colonialism. We've been colonized by the West primarily at that point, mostly. So people are thinking to themselves, oh, really? You think we're going to side with you? So we're against the West. You colonize us. So whatever it is that you're doing, we're not going to be with you. We're going to go with the other side, the Marxist socialist. And also, mind you, it was at a time when the Marxist socialists were the ones who were advocating for, racial equality in times that it was not really en vogue. Although Marx was a known racist, but still the Marxist socialists of the time have been the ones fighting for racial equality. And we know they always show up everywhere. Everywhere there is a minorities being, disregarded, the Marxists love to show up and say, "Hey, we're your ally." We know why. It's not genuine, but we know why. You know what I mean? It's easy. It's a very easy to patch yourself on very real grievances, right? They have different agenda, but for now, let us be allies. So we sided with the Marxist socialists at the time because we had just come out of colonialism and we were rejecting the West and anything West, including capitalism as their system. We were supporting the Marxist socialists because they're the ones who have been allies in our racial equality fight. And also, remember, those were the times where almost any respectable intellectual was a Marxist socialist. And that's how most African nations started their independent journey, with leaders who have espoused and drunken the crazy Marxist socialist ideologies. And to this day, many of our nations are running more or less like that, with 5-year plan a la Soviet styles and all of that, even though they like to think that they're not socialist. No, you are. So when I discovered all of that, that was it. That was it. Now my whole life is about, I'm consumed about how do we turn this around. That's when I started to know much more about the world of the libertarians. But most importantly, I discovered that as I looked into all the ideas, I discovered that very much I'm a classical liberal at heart. So I discovered the word for what I felt before, but never had words for it. Once I discovered these ideas, that it was not, so there was my lived experience. And by the way, this is why it's a bit confusing, because I started out as a communist. I used to be a communist. I used to be a communist because for me, just like, what drags people into communism, I thought it was the best chance that the poor have, that the capitalists are the exploitative class and all of that. I used to believe all of that. But through my lived experience, I literally tell people I had an intellectual journey. Like how when people ask me what's your story, I don't tell them the story of how I went from doing this to doing that. I most often talk to them about my intellectual journey because to me that was the most defining journey of my life. It's like how I went from believing what I used to believe and then having to confront my lived experience to come out on the other side. And then when I come out on the other side, I discovered that you had all types of ideologies within the free market world. But I discovered that my comfortable place and the one that I really align with 100% is basically classical liberalism. And if some people want to insist on calling me a libertarian, I like to define myself as a bleeding heart libertarian because my roots are very simple. I came to these ideas and I came to represent all of this because my whole goal is how can we lift people out of poverty? And my goal is to get to 2.5 billion prosperous Africans by 2050. Because by 2050, 1/4 of the world population will be African. By 2100, it's going to be 1/2. And if nothing is done and we don't stop our socialist ways, I don't even want to imagine what's going to happen to the Africans because it's not going to go well. Mm-hmm. And so so you see, it was a progressive journey. But once I discovered what was the problem, and I discovered the philosophies and I became very serious about economics, I then decided that, and then realizing that freedom and capitalism are under attack. Then I said, oh no, I got to bring my voice to this. Because we cannot afford for these ideas to not win. Because if these ideas don't win, it means death for me and my people, literally. You can't have that. So that's how I got involved onto the freedom movement. And so I like to say that for me, it was never about freedom for freedom's sake, but it was about freedom as it as it relates to it being the greatest fighting chance that the most destitute among us have, and also freedom as something, that yeah. So I know it's a long-winded way, but you can see it was a long journey of discovery, and getting to this place where I am. And it's one of those things that where it's a place of no return. Once you understand these things, all of a sudden you just can't unsee it, because it makes so much sense. And it makes sense because, yeah, as humans, I guess it sounds cliche, but we're born to be free, and we do our best work when we're free.
Yeah, this is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, your lived experience. A lot of what you said, it made me think, the most dangerous words that you can hear, to varying degrees of destruction is I'm from the government and I'm here to help, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's an inconvenience or the literal difference of life and death, right? Which you have seen firsthand, which is terrible.
Yeah.
I want to dive in and ask you more about, your experience in the United States and where you see the future of the United States going in terms of the freedom index. Because as you mentioned, right, comparatively from where you grew up and, Senegal and France, that there's abundance here. There's the opportunity for great things, opportunity to be freer comparatively. But we've got our own set of Marxist socialists, right, who want to enact their policies in the United States. I'm curious, what kind of pushback have you received, within the land of the free for how strongly you stand for these ideas? And what are the greatest threats that the United States faces to take us off the course of freedom? What must we do about that?
Yeah. So there again, I'll talk about my own lived experience. When I discovered that what I discovered was not an anecdote, and it was a very serious case of systemic problem around lack of economic freedom, in this case, in Africa. And when I discovered the virtues and the morality of capitalism, free market capitalism, back then, at that point of the journey, I was living in California, in San Francisco. And when I discovered that, and I started, like how any excited person who just think they just discovered the greatest, secret of the world, you go around and you're so excited, tell everybody and expect them to be able to connect the dots the way you did. Well, when I went to my friends, I lost 90% of my friends, 90. Completely disgusted by these ideas. And
why?
Because, and that's the thing. That's why I discovered, because I was asking the why. And that's why it's part of a problem. They still couldn't tell me what the problem was. I had this one lady, she was saying, Walmart is evil. I mean, and she was basically complaining about, in this case, a video that she had seen of Michael, who then I was dating at that point and became my husband now, because my first husband passed away. But so he was on Bloomberg explaining and talking about how Walmart really almost puts back in the pockets of average American families, I think $4,000. I don't remember, but some not small number for, modest families, right? Because, lower prices and all of that. And also talking about the fact that it was harder to get a job at Walmart than it was to get into Harvard. That tells you everything you need to know. I mean, people really are fighting to get into Walmart, to work for Walmart. But she was saying all these things in the same sentence. She was having a problem with how Walmart, you see, because of all their, they're putting back money into the pockets of modest people because their prices are so low, and the prices are so low because they're exploiting, the people making the product. And it was just not making any sense. And you see, that's the danger of it. It makes no sense. And I'm sitting and I'm looking at it, I'm like, are you hearing what you're saying? What could be wrong with putting back into the pockets of American $4,000 or whatever amount that was back in the days? Don't quote me on this, but it was some number that was not small for a modest family. And who are you to say that Walmart is abusing its workers when workers are the ones freely signing up to try to work there? And there are so many of them trying to work there that the ratio of acceptance is much harder than Harvard. Last time I checked, nobody is putting a gun to their head telling them to go work for Walmart. Maybe it's answering a real need. And who are you to make this decision? And it was just like that about everything. And, eventually at some point, I learned, because I was one of them. My greatest, I had this sense of, oh, Walmart, you will never see me there. Oh, look at these people. So I have to tell you, Sean, and even for someone like me who, I've always said that I am in it to help the most modest among us. Yet I caught that all I was doing was looking down on the modest people, thinking that I know better than them. Because otherwise, how stupid can they be not to know that organic food is better for you than all of these, pesticides laden products? I mean, you have this sense of you just know better. And these poor schmucks, look at it. And it's almost like them applying to work at Walmart because they're idiots. Them, and people buying from there because they don't understand all the other things that are happening, like how things are being exploited and people are being exploited. So what I notice is people who actually don't really have much argument. There is no argument. And it's because there was no argument that actually lost my friends. Because as long as two sides are talking, right, having a conversation, we're putting arguments back and forth, eventually, unless one side is really not there to have a dialogue and a conversation, you eventually get to a place where you're like, I never considered it that way. Or, but no, they just shut the door so that they can stay in the echo chamber. And to me, that's a big danger. There is almost a refusal to talk. But I caught up with that. Because I realized if we ask for anything that you want to succeed, you need for it to grow. Because not growing means eventually you will die. So these ideas cannot just stay within our little, networks and where everything is so, in between us. We have to find a way to bridge. Because if we don't, it's going to come back and bite us. So eventually, I had to really sit and start with myself and look at myself and see how even someone like me, who always had the poor in my heart, how and what happened? Why was I so one-sided? And it was like that about everything. The conservative, I kid you not, to me, you're a Democrat. If you ask me why am I a Democrat, I didn't even know. Oh, maybe I could tell you, well, Republicans are racist. And did anything happen to me with a Republican where they showed me racism? No. I didn't even hang out with Republicans, let alone them having the opportunity to do something to me directly, like a lived experience. But no, I accepted it all face value. And we have our speakers. I used to be a big fan of Vandana Shiva. Vandana Shiva is the reason why Sri Lanka eventually had the riots that they had, because she's the one who promoted this nonsense about the GMOs and don't use fertilizers and all that crap. And eventually they started starving, and then the people rose because of that. She's a big reason for it. I used to be a big supporter of hers. I used to go to Terra Madre. I used to go to all of these things. And so what happens is you're in this echo chamber, and I've never heard anything else before. I have never had the opportunity to hear from the liberty movement. Never. I stumbled upon it after they shunned me, after my friends shunned me, because Michael, in a way, was my bridge with the liberty movement. And him too came from the left. Him too used to think that Republican, terrible, the right, all that stuff, terrible. He actually went to Chicago to study, to prove the Chicago boys wrong. He's like, how can you be serious and still embrace the free markets when it comes
That's
to
commitment.
Yeah, that's commitment. Well, ask me what happened to him. He was depressed literally for 2 years because he learned there that he's been lied to his entire life.
Mm.
That's what happens to most of us who are finally willing to open your eyes. You realize that you've been lied to. You've been lied to actively, or you've been lied to by omission. And so I was no different. And so I really had to have a moment of reckoning with myself. But in my case, it was helpful that I had someone like Michael who was able to help me, bridge the two worlds. And so in my case, I think what has been very helpful is to never forget my motivation as to why I'm here even today doing this work. It's because I always cared about the poor. I always cared about the global poor. But I only heard one side of a story about what needs to be done and why are they poor. Once I discovered about the other side, my first reaction was, this cannot stay in a little ghetto networks of, libertarianism or freedom movements. It's just too small. We gotta bridge with people's hearts and minds. And at that point, my strategy was very simple. I don't even know if I want to call it a strategy, but it was just like, I always go back to lived experience and to my own heart. I understood these people. I understood the people who were anti-capitalist. I know why, because I was in their shoes. And I also know what turned my mind around. And so eventually I just decided that I would meet them where they were and basically start the conversation with them from that shared, common, real, genuine, concern for the poor. But there I learned also that not all people who claim to care about the poor truly care about the poor. Mm. Because me losing 90% of my friends showed me something. It showed me that when exposed to the evidence, because these were not stupid people, it became very clear to me that caring for the poor and their whole standing was basically virtue signaling. We use the poor to signal how much better we are because we care. And the reason I know that is because once presented with the evidence, they didn't tell me you're wrong. They didn't. I would have preferred them to say you're wrong. They didn't. You could tell something was happening. But no. All of a sudden, it's almost as if you have taken away their cover. And they don't, and that's not what, that's what they don't want. And so I think it's very important for us as we do this to find the truly genuine people who truly care. Because when you find them and you approach them from a common shared, concern and love and respect for people who are more modest, and you would love to see them build as much prosperity and human dignity as is possible in human flourishing, then usually you go somewhere. So that's a distinction that I had to learn in my life. And that's also why I spend so much time with young people and why I'm so excited about what young, American for Freedom do, because that's what it is. Young people, by definition, for the most part, oftentimes are non-entrenched people. They truly, truly care. And because we're not entrenched, ideologically speaking, one way or the other, they are willing to give you an ear. They are willing to say, what are you saying? What about this? What about that? But if that is true, how come so-and-so told me this? Or how come so-and-so, here it happening? And I see the lights in their eyes just going. My way of approaching them is not so much the debate way, because that's just not my way. I like dialogue. And so for me, it's about coming and saying, look, I totally get it. You're totally worried about climate change. I get it. And I can share with them because I used to be out there, being against the building of dams and all of that stuff, causing all types of problems because of my views. But and it's only normal and a good thing to care about Mama Earth. It really is. No one should be making fun of you or calling you a tree hugger or whatever. Call me tree hugger if you do, because I love Earth. And I do think we need to watch after her. Okay? But I think, so you approach them from a place of respect and really understanding their concerns and having respect for their concerns, right? And then sharing with them how once upon a time, you fought the same way about protecting that which is what they care about, whether it's the environment, women's rights, you name it. I used to think the same way. I used to think anything for the chimps. But eventually I came to understand that the best way to save the chimps is to make sure that the Tanzanians have jobs. Because if the Tanzanians have jobs, they can provide for themselves. When they provide for themselves, they can buy protein, meat, and not have to go kill the chimps for protein meat, right? Because it's free, baby, just hunt it. And if we have access to renewable, affordable, energy sources, then the Tanzanian people and women don't have to go and hack the trees that are the natural habitat of the chimps. You see how all of a sudden everything starts to make sense. And also, if the life of a chimp is attached to the job of a rancher guy, protecting them, then all of a sudden, their livelihoods are related. So when you start to talk like that to the kids and you just start like, then they start to be like, oh my God, I never thought about it. They start to connect the dots. And it's easy for them to connect the dots because A, they're not stupid, and B, they're not entrenched. They've not been sucked up by ideology yet. Even though they may have been just in an echo chamber for the past 18 years, 20 years of their lives. Everything is still flexible in there. They're still super open. And it's why? Because all of that is guided by their heart. And so for me, this is the job that has to be done. That's the one I'm trying to do. And beyond that, obviously, another one of my lived experience has to be with, so California, eventually, I had to flee California for multiple reasons. First of all, you just feel like you're in an echo chamber. People literally self-censor. No one knows how safe it is to truly say that what you think, especially if it deviates from the mainstream, lefty ways, more extreme ways. Maybe things have changed now, I don't know. But also as an entrepreneur and as a landlord, California was no good for people like me because you're de facto the enemy. The laws are all against you as an employee, as an employer. And it makes sense. Even there, I thought, you're in America. It's all the same everywhere. Freedom equals freedom. But even in America, I had to realize, because I was doing business, all of a sudden I'm starting to compare. I'm like, wait a second. How come in this state, I have to have a license to sell this, but in that other state, I don't have to? How come in this state, I have to be in a commercial kitchen to do this, but in this other one, maybe not? So I'm starting to look, these states don't have the same rules. And eventually, it's after I moved away from California to move to Texas because Texas was so much, it was so much freer from the standpoint of rules and regulations from California. And it's like, wow. And then it's when I looked into it, that's when I finally realized, I'm like, oh, wow, even within the US, there's disparity of freedom. And that's when I learned that actually California is the second to last least free state in the union.
What's the least free state in the union?
I always have to check because I always stop at the and then it makes sense. But I always have to check. Let's check, and maybe we can put it for the people. I always remind myself but I know that it's
I'm gonna guess New York. That's my guess. What was the freest state when you looked it up? Do you remember what the freest state in the union was at the time?
Yeah, I don't remember looking at which one was the freest. We should look at these because next time I should say it. Let us look at those numbers. But California, when I was learning about this, and you know who told me about this? It was John Chisholm. He's the one who told. But when he said it, I was like, yes, this makes sense now. This makes sense now. So let us check out who those are. But even in the US, you see that, and it has real repercussions. You're seeing people literally like there's an exodus from California now to places like Texas, where I am. I call myself a refugee to Texas from California. And then now you're going to have the same thing happening from New York to Florida, probably. And so here, when you're saying what's the worry for the U.S., is that I think our side, the freedom movement side, while we're doing great work and while we've been expanding, I feel like we've not been expanding fast enough. And I think there has been a real problem especially, I point it straight back to education. I think where we made a mistake, it's not understanding or acting. Maybe some people understood earlier. I know my husband is one of them. But how much action did we take? I don't know how much. But when we somehow, it seems to me that at some point, a deal was made, a quiet deal between freedom lovers and the ones who are on the other side. One side said, as long as we get to build our businesses, all of that, whatever, we don't care. And the other side said, fine, we will take culture and education. And guess who wins in the long run at that game? Culture and education, because it's all about culture and all about education. And I would argue that education gets people their culture, and that culture gives us policies. And culture has also its own path. So academia, media, and Hollywood run the show. And what is it? Culture and education. And they're related in those steps. And oftentimes it's these professors, crazy Marxist professors, who come up with some of the wildest, craziest ideas. The media runs with it, and Hollywood makes it popular. And eventually, and it's been steeps in K-12 all over the place. So I think where our side has really made a problem, and I don't even like to talk about society, but where the principles of freedom have not been very careful is in what was being taught to our young people, knowing that the young person of today will become the people making decisions tomorrow. And I would argue that today we have probably our first crop that came to an where they have power. They are in their mid-30s, and they are in positions of decision-making. And they're coming with what they believe, what they've been taught their whole life, while you, the parent, was working, too busy making money. Nothing wrong with that. But we trusted our kids with people who saw the world in a completely different way. But they had them most of the time. And so today, I am excited because school choice. That was the best way to dismantle all of this, right? And make sure that this whole propagandizing and brainwashing that's been going on, from that standpoint, is going to be decentralized, and there's going to be a better chance for different people to be learning about different things, right? And not be stuck. So I think that has been a great thing. So that was great. When it comes to, because you're asking me what are the concerns that I'm seeing in America. So I think thanks to school choice, I do believe that very soon we're going to start to see, the pressure go away because of school choice, thanks to school choice. The other one has to do with energy. So energy also has been under attack in the name of climate change and the battles that the anti-fossil fuel zealots have taken. Right now, we have a Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, who is, if you ask me, on the right side of the argument, and he's doing a fantastic job. What's going to happen after his tenure? I don't know. I hope that in the meantime, we wake enough people up. It was actually very encouraging to hear Bill Gates say, what he said about, fossil fuels, saying that it's more important to save people through energy prosperity than, the whole climate change stories and all that stuff. So that's, we still have some work to do with Bill Gates, but at least, the story is starting to change. And then the other thing has to do with this problem that we have around rules and regulations. The US has gotten worse and worse across the board for the most part. Some states are doing better than others, for sure, Texas, for example, but still, it is nowhere where it was back in the more, freer days. And I argue we're going to have to find a way to get rid of these rules, many of these rules and regulations. It's really going to be the name of the game if we want to re-tap into innovation. You can't innovate when your hands are tied. And so there, what I'm seeing is when it comes to rules and regulations and policy reforms, I'm a little bit dubious about how much reforms can do, because it's piecemeal legislation. While you're done fixing one, getting rid of one over here, maybe 20 more have popped up over there. Everything is so cumbersome. And I think here, what I see as the ultimate strategy for the US, but I also see the same for Africa and other places in the world, and in general across the world, is I think what's going to be winning are going to be the startup cities. I call them startup cities. Some people call them, special economic zone. I call them startup cities. These are cities where it's not about just startups, but it's you have Israel being a startup nation. It's a place where things start up. You can start many things. That's my definition of it. I'm sure the startup nation people will say something different. But in any case, for me, I'm betting on what I call ethical startup cities. These cities that are going to be just like Dubai, Singapore. The principle is the same, is make the business environment top-notch. Provide entrepreneurs with maximum freedom to enterprise and watch the magic happen.
Yeah,
And
I love
believe,
that.
yeah, and I believe that in America, and Dubai, people can complain and be like, the workers' rights and all of that stuff. And I say, to me, it's more indicting that somebody feels that even though some of the working conditions are terrible, that they still feel it's better for them to be working in Dubai than it is to stay in Pakistan or India or somewhere in Africa. That's more what the problem is. And people are voting with their feet. Leave them. This is better than nothing else. So I believe we can build cities like that, but with an ethical, stamp on it, like flavor. And that's a conversation for another day. But that's really what I think is going to have to happen in the US. And I know that some people are working with, looking at the idea of partnering with some native communities, because as you know, the native communities, they usually have some type of autonomy from the government of the United States. And so using that autonomy to basically establish the creation of these new areas where they don't have to put up with the rules and regulations that the rest of the state that they're in maybe perhaps practices. And there are many very promising, movements in that direction right now. So I think eventually what you'll see is such establishments of zones coming up. People talk about the Starbase of Elon Musk in Texas, but it's not quite exactly what I'm talking about, because he still has to go through many of the same rules as the rest of Texas. So, but I do think we're going to get to a point of creating these, and it's going to help the fact that African nations are working on these type of things. I know because that's what I'm working on. And so I think if they don't get to see it right away for what it is worth, they're going to see it happening other places. And you know how it is. Eventually will come down here as well. So for me, ultimately, that's what's going to happen, because it's so hard to just do reforms and piecemeal legislation. It's like in Texas, can we decide there's an area of Texas where we just go and there you work? The federal government asked me, they said, what can we do? And I'm like, I guess that's a whole nother conversation. But anyway, so
I'm getting the cue from the producer here. We are coming to the end of our time, but I want to make sure I ask a couple of just two more key questions. And also one thing, very much, I appreciate the praise earlier on. You said you're excited about the work we're doing. We're Young Americans for Liberty, as opposed to Young Americans for Freedom. I was think of YAF. Oh no, so sorry. That's okay. We get checks sometimes that say Young Americans for Freedom.
I love you guys as well. I love
so if it does come up organically again, it's Young Americans for
Liberty.
No,
I love you guys as well. And then I was gonna be like, guys, you need to merge, or you need to, it's like, yell and laugh. Yeah, I know. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. No, it happens all the time. I wanted to ask you, Magatte, I saw a quote that was attributed to you where you had said, hey, I'd rather not. In fact, I've turned down opportunities to go to Harvard and Stanford because they would destroy me as an entrepreneur. It would be bad. It would not make me a good entrepreneur. I'm curious what you meant by that, and talking more about the state of college campuses in the US as it leads to increasing prosperity and freedom.
Yeah, I think for me, what I was speaking about back then is I was seeing my friends coming out of these places, and I felt that I didn't see, what I saw mostly was how they were being taught to conform. Because make no mistake, even all of these, I dropped out of, to become an entrepreneur. It just almost becomes like a fashion, right? So back in the days, what all I was talking about in my case was that I had noticed that I did not find these students to be very entrepreneurial. In my mind, what I was seeing was people were being prepared to be great managers, to be great, they were going to be great managers. They were going to be even great, probably started as consultants, at McKinsey or whatever. I was seeing people like that being trained. I was not seeing entrepreneurs. It doesn't mean that there's not entrepreneurs among them, but it means that the majority of the people I was seeing, and here I was talking about the MBA program, I just felt like it was training managers and not entrepreneurs. And I felt like, and they all felt like very, what do you call it? They all felt very, at least back then, they all felt very, but again, I feel like just the entrepreneurial spirit was being taken away from them. That's what I felt.
Gotcha. My camera just cut out there.
That's okay. But
yeah,
today,
okay, got it back.
But today, when you're telling me about the college campuses and what's going on in there, I can tell you from where I'm standing what I'm seeing, and why I could see that it would be a problem. Oftentimes, I go to campuses and I say what I have to say, and I get so many of these students who come to me. It's funny. You'll see the kid who looks like very much like he's completely embraced the whole work stuff, whatever you want to call it. Literally, he's got the look, the t-shirt, the
Maybe
props.
The white guy with dreads, right?
Yeah, the props, everything. Yeah, and then tell you, I'm so glad they got for you to say these things, because now it's going to help me talk about it too. Like, you see that people are self-censoring. What I notice on college campuses is we would be fools to think that they all think the same way. They really don't. There is, how do I say that? I notice that there is self-censoring, and I notice that many people don't agree with what they're seeing. I even had students who tell me that basically they are, when they do their, when they have papers that they need to give to be graded, they say they know exactly how a professor thinks, and they say they give him what he wants. So they have a good grades, they're not going to fight them. And they also tell me that I shut up during my whole time. So that's, at least those guys, I know it's horrible to live like that for 4 years, but at least, they're not walking out of there completely brainwashed. But then the problem you have is the brainwashed ones. Those to me are the most scary ones, because those to me, you look at them, you look in the eyes, and it's almost like there's nothing there. It's just like, and then those scare me. Why? Because that's where I sense sometimes violence coming from, right? Could be coming from. But it doesn't mean you don't engage with them. It just means you need more time with them. Because with them, what needs to happen is you need to establish common ground. Because at the end of the day, they're not mean people. They're not bad people. What they care about matters. But
yeah, they just got the wrong solutions. They got the wrong formula.
They got the wrong solution,
Government's
wrong
not the
formula.
answer.
Yeah, wrong solution, wrong formula, and it has become their identity. That part is scary. It has become their identity. So what the job you have to do at some point is to help them dissociate their identity from that. And once you are able to do that, then you can have that conversation. And you can see it takes more time. And that's why sometimes I wish that some of us, the way we're doing these things, and it is true, Young Americans for Liberty does this very well as well, because you spend time with these students. And I think you have seminars with them, right? Where you have them there. Some of your programs, isn't it true that you have them for quite a while and you walk them through some motions?
Yep. I fully trained on the ideas of liberty and how to apply them in real life.
Exactly. So I think this is a type of work that needs to be done, and be able to invite people from all walks of life, students from all walks of life, and just make it look like an immersion journey where they come and they get to learn something different. And it's not about indoctrinating them or anything, but it's just, hey, here is this other side of the story. How about you come and hear it from people who have, lived it under different angles. And so, that's U.S. campuses.
Oh, tremendous. Well, Magatte, thank you so much for joining us today. Any closing thoughts? I'm curious if you, to close us out, thank you for joining us today, Magatte. If you had one piece of advice for someone who's been sitting on the sidelines, who wants to get involved in the liberty movement but doesn't know where to start, what would you tell them to do?
I would tell them to start with what they care the most about. If wildlife conservation is what you care the most about, then see how these ideas are going to help you save the most wildlife and or provide the best life to wildlife. If what you care about is women's rights, same thing. Try to find out from networks like ours how freedom can best serve, is the best servant to the cause of women's rights. So I would just say start with what you care about and then dive into that, trying to find out where and how freedom actually is the best ally and your best tool and recipe for tackling that passion of yours. And because freedom really works across the board. Across the board, it makes our lives easier. Across the board. That's why this thing is so magic, right? So don't try to go and be like, oh my God, I just want to go and drink from the fire hose and which book should I read and all of that. Start with what you know and start with what you care about. That's always the best place to start. And then from there, probably other questions are going to pop up. Other things are going to pop up. But start with what you care about and then reach out to the community, reach out to YAL, you reach out to other places like that, and be like, hey, what I care about is wildlife, or what I care about is AI. And AI, is it about AI not doing this to people, or whatever it is? This is what I care about, and I want to know how freedom is. Does freedom help better with it? If so, how? Who is doing what in this, and who has some good writings, and where do I start? And I promise you, you're going to start to be just like, whoa. And then, and then start attending these events. Again, places like YAL are great because and here you can see I'm talking to young people a lot, but I'm also talking to more adult people as well. Again, it start with what you love, start with what is your passion, and then go find how freedom is the best tool to support that passion of yours. That's what I would say.
I love it. Thank you so much, Magatte, for your time, for all the work you're doing, and your contributions to the cause of liberty. It's been great to have you on Voices of Liberty.
Thank you, Sean, and likewise to you guys as well.
Thanks for being with us today. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe to Voices of Liberty on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, or YouTube. And to learn more about how you can be a part of the movement advancing freedom in our lifetime, visit yaliberty.org. I'm Sean Themea, and thank you for listening to Voices of Liberty, where we keep the torch of liberty burning by telling the stories of those who carry it forward. See you next time.